Strength and hypertrophy are the two different adaptations. So when you're training for each variable should be manipulated to maximize whichever adaptation we are trying to achieve. In this video, we'll uncover how exercise selection made difference when you're training for strength versus hypertrophy. First, we need to cover what exactly is strength and hypertrophy are. Straight is the simply refer to maximum amount of weight that can you will lift. This is usually for one repetition. In other words, a one rep mass. So the goal for strength training is to lift the most amount of weight possible, not necessarily to increase muscle size. Strength gains occurred as a result of the three primary adaptations: neutral efficiency, technique, and the muscle's growth. Neutral efficiency refers how much forces can be produced by the primary movements of the exercise. So we given muscles mass that we have. We can train to produce more force without actually increasing muscle size. Neutral adaptations are specific to each exercise and rep ranges performed. So we can become efficiency at a one exercise and expect to be quality of efficiency and other exercise. Rather, we only develop this efficiency by performing the specific exercise. We want to get stronger in the heavy loads. Simply, but we can get stronger and what we practice. Technical efficiency is similar in neural efficiency, although is the more about making lift more biomechanic efficient. Over time, trainees can learn how to take advantages of biomechanics to leverage more load for any particular exercise. An example of this is to arch the back in the bench press, which is reduce the range of motion and improves our leverage to lift more weight. The third primary adaptation contributed to strength gains is the muscles growth. Simply put, if we have more muscle mass in the prime movement of a lift, then we have a more contractile tissues to become neurally and technically efficiency with. This provide a larger foundations that will be increase our strength and potential. So once we maximize the neutral and the technically efficiency, the primary long-term driver of the future strength gains will be gains on the muscle's mass. So ultimately, the key point to understand is that strength is a performance outcome. The ultimate goal is to lift more weight over time. Hypertrophy, on the other hand, is a different adaptation. This refers to an increase in the size of the muscles. This is primarily achieved via an increase in the number of myofibers in each muscle fiber, which is basically just the smallest unit and the contractile tissues in the muscles. As we accumulate more myofibers in each muscle fiber, we end up with the thicker muscle fibers and a larger overall muscle belly. There is also scapulation, the muscles growth, and also occurred via other adaptations such as sarcoplasmin, hypertrophy, and hyperplasia. For most people, we want to achieve hypertrophy for aesthetics purposes, to make our physique look more muscular. So, the key point to understand here is that unlike straight hypertrophy is a structural adaptation, not a performance outcome. These definitions are important to understand because they will be determined how we modify our training to prefer each training goal. Now that we understand the difference between a straight and hypertrophy, let's overcome how exercise selection made difference when you training for each goal. The first factor to consider for exercise selection is the principle of specificity. This refers how to similar our training is compared with the competition requirements. Specificity encompasses all training variables including exercise selections, like we all covered this video, but also included other variables like rep rangers and low technique lifting equipment, etc. In relation to a straight training, specificity plays a major role in the how our training is conducted. This is because the entire training plan should be based around what exactly our straight goals are. Do we want to improve our one rep mass squat, or we want to improve how many body weight pull-ups we can perform? Whatever the goal is, there is a specific element to the training process. So for exercise selection, we want to implement the actual exercise that we want to get stronger. And if you don't perform this exercise, we don't develop the specific neural and technically specific adaptations are the required to maximize strength. Of course, the entire training program isn't going to include only specific exercises because we also have other accessory lifting in the training plan which may have a different goal. This brings us to the hypertrophy training. The principle of specific doesn't really apply to hypertrophy training in the same way as it does for strength. This is because hypertrophy is a structural adaptation. So, we aren't really concerned with the specificity neural technique adaptation because we don't care about maximizing lifting performance. Rather, we only concerned with training the muscles to get a structural response. This can be achieved using many different exercise training with the same muscles. There are multiple exercises which can all train the same muscles group and elicit a similar hypertrophy responses. So, there are no mandatory exercises for hypertrophy training. Rather, the goal is to simply stress the target muscles and lifts off nicely. The next point regarding exercise selection, which is muscle stress. This refers to which muscles receive the most amount of the stress and locate fatigue during the exercise. For strength training, muscles stress is not really important. This is because it doesn't really matter which muscles are being trained. It just matters how much load they can lift. And generally, strength is improving when you involve more muscles in the exercise and distribute stress more eventually among the relay muscles. For example, we can usually lift more weight by performing a low bar squat comparing with a high bar squat. This is because the low bar squats allows more of the gluteus and the hamstrings to contribute to the lifting in addition quads. So ultimately, we shouldn't really be concerned which muscles are being trained. When you're selecting exercise for straight training, rather, we shouldn't just implement the variation, which allows us to lift the most weight, and should it be noticed that we still need to understand which muscles are involved in the strength lift, because we may implement accessory exercise to specifically target such muscles. For hypertrophy training, on the other hand, is the complement opposite, because hypertrophy is a structural adaptation. The goal is to stress the target muscles. So the exercise we implement should be those with maximally fatigue the target muscles that we are trying to train. There are many exercises which can all stress the same muscles significantly, although some exercises achieve this better than others. Based on anatomy of the muscles and the biomechanics of the lift, and the perceived stimulus of the exercise trainers, should implement those which tend to provide the most stress on the muscles that is being target. When a last consideration for exercise selection, when you're comparing straight versus hypertrophy training, is the stimulus to the fatigue ratio. This refers to the hypertrophy stimulus of the exercise comparing with the systemic fatigue and the jump stress. The exercise inductions for straight training, once again, this isn't really a relay topic. This is because we need to implement the specific competition exercise regardless of how fatiguing they are. So even if the exercise tends to irritate your joints or is this highly systematically fatiguing, there is nothing you can do about it. You must still find a way to perform the exercise. If your goal is to maximize strength, we can always manipulate other variables like volume and frequency to minimize long-term stress and fatigue. But ultimately, we still need to perform that exercise that we want to get stronger and the hypertrophy training. Like we have mentioned, there are no mandatory exercise. So the stimulus to fatigue ratio becomes much more related. We want to implement the exercise which provide the best hypertrophy stimulus and the least joint stress and systematically fatigue. This will allow us to get the best outcomes with the lowest risk and injuries in the burnout. Selecting low fatigue exercise will also allow us to make our training session more efficient. In other words, we will be able to get the same stimulus with the less time, effort, and fatigue, or to get better stimulus with the same time, effort, and fatigue. So, the hypertrophy training, we want to select the exercise which provide us with the best stimulus for the target muscles in the least amount of fatigue. For example, is stiff left deadlift will provide a great stimulus for the hamstrings and the less overall fatigue compared with the conventional deadlift, making it a more appropriate choice for hypertrophy training in the most cases. So, we summarize this video, at least establish some practical recommendation. First, we should understand that straight and the hypertrophy are two different adaptations. Straight is the performance of become, while hypertrophy is the structural adaptation. Therefore, we shouldn't manipulate the variable in preference. Whichever adaptation we want to focus on, one of these variables that we can change is the exercise selections. for straight training. We need to perform the exercise that we want to get stronger. And this because neutral and technical adaptations following the principle of specificity, meaning we only get better at what we practice. On the other hand, there are no mandatory exercise for hypertrophy training. This is because hypertrophy adaptations are the targeting by muscles stress throughout dynamic resistance training. So for hypertrophy, we want to implement the exercise which is significantly stress the target muscles and also which have a low fatigue cause. This will provide the best hypertrophy stimulus while simultaneously minimizing injuries risk.